The lantern trembled in Daniel Morrow's hand, casting jagged shadows across the barn walls. Something moved among the hay bales, but it wasn't a horse or a thief. A woman crouched there, her clothes tattered, arms wrapped around herself like she could hold the world from breaking her. Her eyes were wide, frantic, and when she spoke, her voice was a shivering whisper that cut through the silence. "Please, don't let them find me." Daniel froze. The words weren't new to him. He had heard pleas like this before, but something in her tone, the way it carried desperation and terror, made his chest tighten. He wanted to ask who, what, why, but his voice stuck in his throat. Instead, he lowered the lantern carefully, letting the dim glow reveal the deep bruises along her forearms and the mud streaked across her face. The barn smelled of dust, hay, and the faint copper tang of blood. A horse shifted nervously outside, stamping hooves in the dirt, and the wind rattled the wooden siding, as if testing his resolve. Daniel's hand hovered near his Colt, the one he kept for moments like this, yet he knew it wouldn't solve the puzzle that crouched before him. Her gaze flicked toward the shadows behind the hay, panic rising in sudden, small gasps. "They'll know I'm here. They'll—" Her words died, swallowed by the creak of the barn door swinging slightly in the wind. She pressed herself flatter against the floor, trembling so violently that Daniel feared she might shatter. He swallowed, steadying the lantern. "Who's after you?" he asked quietly, careful not to sound threatening. No answer. Just the whisper of her ragged breathing, the scrape of hay beneath her trembling body, and the distant howl of coyotes outside. Daniel's mind raced. Out here, on the edge of the territory, hiding someone was never simple. There were neighbors who were quick to judge, lawmen quick to shoot first and ask questions later, and rumors that traveled faster than the wind. Yet the way she looked at him, part pleading, part fear, made it impossible to walk away. A sudden clatter from the loft above made both of them flinch. Dust fell from the rafters. The lantern's light trembled across a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Daniel's heart thudded against his ribs as the woman's whisper rose again, trembling. "They'll come soon." He took a cautious step forward, boots creaking on the straw-strewn floor, and then froze. From the corner of the barn, something shifted. A figure, watching, silent, its presence unannounced yet unmistakable. Daniel's hand tightened on the lantern. And then the first clear sound of a horse's hooves, heavy and deliberate, struck the night outside the barn door. Daniel's eyes flicked to the shadows where the figure had shifted, but it was gone. Only the whisper of hay settling remained. He turned back to the woman, whose chest heaved, eyes wide and damp with sweat. "You can't stay here," he said carefully, his voice low, almost apologetic. "If they find you in my barn, it won't just be me in trouble." Her gaze met his, frantic and pleading. "Please, just one night. Then I'll leave. I swear." He swallowed, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a storm cloud. He'd learned the hard way that compassion in the West came with a price. The lawmen weren't forgiving. Neighbors were prone to suspicion and rumor, and merciless men often rode out of the hills for sport or revenge. Yet, he couldn't walk away. "All right," he said finally, stepping back toward the loft where he kept old feed sacks and supplies. "You can stay, but you stay quiet. You don't make a sound." A faint tremor of relief passed over her face, but it didn't last. Outside, a branch snapped. Horses whinnied in the distance. Daniel's ears pricked. The sound of another rider, or maybe more, was approaching. Fear coiled in his gut. "They're close," she whispered, clutching her arms tighter. Daniel shook his head. "No, not yet. If they find you here, it'll be bad. For both of us." He moved toward the loft, dragging a couple of hay bales to make a makeshift hiding spot. "You'll be safe up there for now." She hesitated, then scrambled up, her movements urgent but clumsy, kicking loose straw that fell like golden snow onto the floor. Daniel followed, keeping the lantern low, heart hammering as the outside world pressed closer. From the shadows near the barn door, a distant shout carried faintly in the wind. Someone called a name, hers, he thought, though he wasn't sure. His jaw tightened. The moral choice he'd just made now carried consequences he hadn't yet counted. The woman's fingers trembled around the edge of the loft, her knuckles white. "They'll find me," she whispered again, and for the first time, Daniel noticed a faint mark on her forearm, a symbol, carved and faded, one that spoke of danger he didn't fully understand. His mind raced. Should he ride out to meet this threat, or stay and let them come, risking everything to protect a stranger? Fear and suspicion gnawed at him from all sides, and in that silence the wind brought another sound. The distant thrum of hooves multiplied, heavy, deliberate, approaching fast. Daniel's hand instinctively moved to his Colt. The woman looked at him, wide-eyed, desperate. "Please, don't let them take me." He nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I won't." A loud, sharp knock exploded on the barn door, rattling the old wood like gunfire. The knock came again, harder this time, resonating through the barn like a drumbeat of warning. Daniel froze, lantern in one hand, Colt in the other, listening to the wind carry faint murmurs from outside. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Silence answered, only the scrape of hooves in the dirt beyond the doors. The woman shrank further into the corner of the loft, fingers clutching the edge of the hay bales. "They're here," she whispered, barely audible, her lips trembling. "Please, don't let them see me." Daniel's eyes scanned the barn's shadowed corners. A single board rattled in the wind, making him flinch. He wanted to believe it was just that, wind against wood, but deep down he knew the truth. Someone, or more than one, was hunting her, and they were close enough to hear the beating of his own heart. A muffled voice came from the other side of the door, low, commanding, edged with suspicion. "Daniel Morrow, we know you're in there. Open up." Daniel's pulse spiked. The law, or maybe bounty hunters, he couldn't be sure. He glanced at the woman, whose face had gone pale under the lantern's glow. She whispered something he couldn't quite catch, a name perhaps, or a plea, and the sound of her voice tugged at him, rooting him in place. He stepped back, weighing the options. Fight, hide, run, each carried its own peril. Outside, hoofbeats multiplied, an echo of horses impatient, dangerous, circling the barn. One wrong move, and it would all come crashing down. The woman exposed, himself wounded, the fragile promise of protection broken. The voice outside shifted. "We know she's here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Daniel moved quietly to the loft ladder. "Stay up there," he hissed. "Don't make a sound." She nodded, trembling violently, and clutched the hay like a lifeline. Footsteps outside quickened. Dust drifted under the doorframe, kicked up by restless boots. Daniel's Colt felt heavy, reassuring, yet wholly inadequate against the number he suspected outside. The first horse neighed, breaking the silence, followed by another. Shadows flitted along the gaps in the barn walls, hinting at shapes larger, more threatening than the night itself. A voice suddenly barked closer. "Daniel, we know she's inside. Open up or we'll come in." He took a slow, deliberate breath. If he opened the door, they'd see her. If he stayed hidden, they might break in anyway. And if he fired, death would rain on all sides. The woman gasped, pressing her face into the hay. Her trembling grew more violent. Daniel's gaze swept over the loft, the barn floor, the mounting dread outside. A plan formed, fragile, desperate, and dangerous. Then came the sound of metal scraping against wood. The door began to give. Daniel tightened his grip on the Colt. The woman's whispered plea pierced the tension. "Please, don't let them take me alive." And the door burst inward, throwing the barn into shadow, dust, and the sharp tang of fear. The door slammed open with a thunderous crash, sending dust and splinters into the air. Daniel's Colt rose instinctively, but he froze when he saw the first face framed in the doorway. A young rider, eyes wide with confusion, hand raised not on a weapon, but on the brim of his hat. Behind him, two more figures hesitated, unsure, tension coiling between them like a drawn rope. "Daniel," the rider said, voice uncertain. Daniel's gaze flicked to the loft, where the woman still crouched, clutching too. He hay like it was her only shield. She was trembling, silent now, but her wide, fearful eyes met his. He took a slow step back from the Colt. "Stay," he whispered, keeping his voice calm, almost tender. The riders shifted uneasily, glances exchanged. There was suspicion in their eyes, assumption, accusation, but something else too. Recognition, perhaps, that the barn was not a trap, but a shelter. Daniel lowered the Colt and gestured toward the loft. "She's hurt. She needs help." The woman's eyes filled with a hesitant hope. One of the riders, the eldest, stepped closer, voice softer now. "Hurt? What happened?" She swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. I ran. They wanted me gone. Punished." Her words faltered, shadowed by the memory of bruises, threats, and the relentless pursuit. Daniel reached out, offering her a small cloth from his coat. "Here, clean yourself, quietly." She took it, trembling, but didn't speak. Her hands worked methodically, dabbing at cuts and dirt, the motion small but human, grounding them both in the quiet after the storm. The riders lowered their weapons slowly, confusion giving way to understanding. One of them handed her a canteen of water. She hesitated, then drank in small, grateful sips. A silence followed, stretched and fragile, as if the world had paused, listening to the small human sounds of healing, water sloshing, cloth against skin, soft gasps of breath. Daniel leaned against the loft ladder, watching. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "you find trust in the oddest places. You have to take it where you can." The woman's eyes flicked toward him, a flicker of understanding and gratitude shining through the terror. She pressed the cloth to her lips for a brief moment, a gesture small but intimate, bridging the gap between fear and relief. Outside, hoofbeats still echoed in the distance, but they no longer carried immediate threat, only a reminder of the world waiting beyond the barn. Daniel caught that the smallest movement, a slight tilt of her head toward the riders, a hesitant acknowledgement of human connection forged under pressure. Then, from the barn's edge, a shadow flickered. "Papamum, sister." Someone still lurking, watching. The moment of calm was fragile, a heartbeat before danger might return. The woman's whisper cut through the tense silence. Will they come back?" Daniel looked to the doorway, then at her, then back to the night. His jaw tightened. "Maybe, but for now, we survive." A gust of wind rattled the barn siding, carrying with it the smell of smoke and dust, and a distant, unidentifiable sound, a warning that the night wasn't done testing them. The night stretched long and tense, shadows crawling across the barn floor like restless spirits. Outside, the wind whispered through the fence posts, carrying faint hoofbeats that suggested the hunters had not fully abandoned their pursuit. Daniel kept the lantern low, hands steady on the colt, but his mind wandered to the woman crouched in the loft above him. She had slept, or perhaps merely rested, her body finally easing from the tremors of fear. The makeshift bandages on her arms were soaked and fraying, yet they held. Daniel offered her a piece of stale bread, which she accepted with a quiet nod, the small gesture bridging their silence. No words could capture the enormity of the night, nor the fragile trust forming in the dim glow of the lantern. Morning came slow, gray and uncertain, spilling light across the hay and splintered doorframe. The distant ridge revealed dust trails, evidence that the pursuit had paused, but not ended. Daniel surveyed the horizon, lips pressed tight. There was no joy in survival, only relief and lingering caution. She descended from the loft, slow, careful, each step measured as if testing the solidity of the world beneath her feet. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. The night had been survived not by strength alone, but by choices, by trust, by the small human gestures that could tip the scales of fate. "Thank you," she whispered finally, voice fragile yet sincere, "for not letting them find me." Daniel nodded, the lines in his face deepening with the weight of all he'd seen and done. "No one should have to face the night alone," he said quietly, "not if I can help it." A rustling beyond the barn drew their attention. The riders who had accompanied her earlier emerged cautiously from the trees, faces marked with the fatigue of uncertainty. They nodded to Daniel, silent acknowledgement of the shared ordeal. No grand gestures, no overt gratitude, just the weight of unspoken respect between people who had glimpsed fear and chosen mercy. For a moment, the world outside the barn felt suspended, fragile as the morning mist. Then, without warning, a lone crow cawed, slicing through the quiet. The woman started, eyes darting toward the horizon, yet she did not flee. Daniel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle, the gesture carrying reassurance without words. Years later, she would remember that night, not for the fear, but for the quiet humanity that had met her at the edge of the world. A man who risked suspicion, judgment, danger itself, to offer a fragile shelter. The barn, battered and dust-filled, became a memory of survival, a place where courage and compassion collided under the weight of the West. Daniel stepped back as she left, watching her small figure move toward the rising sun. The barn was silent again, the lantern extinguished, shadows retreating into corners. He lingered for a long moment, hand brushing the rough wood, then turned and walked toward his horses, Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and sage, and for the first time that night, Daniel felt the slow exhale of relief. The world remained. Dangerous, unpredictable, but for now, the night had been survived. The camera of memory would linger on the doorway, empty save for dust motes dancing in the morning light. A lone figure had passed through, fear in her eyes, hope in her heart, leaving only the silent witness of a man who chose humanity over indifference. And then the barn door creaked softly, closing the frame as if to say, this story had ended, but the West went on, unforgiving and eternal.